Have you heard of diabetes, Cushing syndrome, hyperthyroidism, gigantism? Um, these are just a sample of the diseases that can occur because of a failure of the endocrine system. So we'll be talking about the endocrine system, the glands that are involved in the endocrine system, and a bit about how it functions. So your body has these two modes of communication, your nervous system and your endocrine system. So we'll be comparing and contrasting those, and also talking about where are your endocrine glands and what are the organs that they have an effect on, and really starting to understand what's a hormone, what do we mean by a target cell, and what causes hormones to be released in the first place. We call that their stimuli for release. First Zoom room question. Let's compare and contrast the nervous and endocrine systems of how those allow for different modes of communication in your body. And I want you to think about during this lecture how they differ anatomically and functionally. Doesn't that just sound like the kind of short answer question I would put on a quiz? Sure does. So what's a hormone? If the endocrine system is all dependent upon a release of hormone into your body to help it function, what's a hormone anyway? And how do they travel through the body? Well, first of all, let's remember the nervous system, which is not working with hormones. It's working with electrical action potentials that move down those axons. And then between our neurons, we have those synapses where our neurotransmitters are carrying information from one neuron to the next. And as you'll recall, our dendrites, we've got lots of them. And I love the analogy you guys came up with that it's like this neuron has 1,000 different ears and can simultaneously hear 1,000 different conversations. And from that determines whether or not an action potential is going to move down that axon to the next part of a circuit. So that's happening really fast because it's an electrical impulse, and it's really targeted because the neurotransmitters are only being released in that little synapse gaps. They're not traveling very far. It's just in that one little spot. So let's compare that to the endocrine system, what a hormone is and how they travel through the body. So a hormone is just a small molecule that gets released from an endocrine gland. And it's considered a chemical messenger. And the message is, hey, cells, you should do something different from what you're doing right now. What does it tell them to change? Well, a variety of things. It might tell it to increase the number of enzymes it has. It might inactivate some enzymes. It might open up portals or channels in them down. It might express new genes. It can do a lot of things, depending on the hormone and depending on the receptor. The big idea, they are chemical messengers that get released from endocrine glands. And they come in two basic flavors, proteins and sterols. An example of a protein hormone would be insulin, which helps regulate blood sugar, and cortisol would be a type of sterol. That's really interesting because what that tells you is basically how that hormone is going to interact with its target cell. We'll talk about that more later. And then secondly, how do hormones travel through the body? Well, they travel through the blood and the lymph system. So once they get released from the endocrine gland, they are free to travel wherever. In fact, they do. What's incredible about these hormones is they're only going to interact with the cells that have a target receptor for them. We call those the target cells if there's a protein receptor for that hormone to interact with. If that organ, those cells do not have a receptor, then the hormone just keeps going on its merry way and takes its message elsewhere. So what does that look like? As stated, you have your, we're starting over here on the left in the yellow endocrine gland, and that little purple dot is representing some hormone that's getting released from the endocrine gland, and it's going to travel through the bloodstream. And throughout the body. And there might be organs that don't have a protein receptor specific for that hormone. So every hormone has its own specific types of receptors that it will bind to. If it doesn't have that receptor, it's just going to keep going until it reaches a point where there is a cell with that receptor. And once it binds to that receptor, that leads to a whole chain of events that can change the activity of that cell. So something for you to practice is to relate the following: hormone, receptor protein, target cell. We'll see what you come up with in our Zoom room. So some big ideas about the endocrine system. 1, hormones travel through the blood, through the body, through the bloodstream. They also travel through the lymph system, which is the cleanup crew for your cardiovascular system. Cardiovascular system is leaky. Something's got to pick up that extra fluid. It's your lymph system. So your hormones can travel through that as well. A hormone's going to change what a cell is doing. It's going to have a message that says, cough now, no. Like I mentioned, activate genes, deactivate genes, open channels, close channels, change metabolism, divide now, stop dividing. Very bossy, these hormones. They've got lots of ideas. But they only have an effect if there's a receptor there. There's no receptor. It's like, la, 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 la. Right? Can't hear you. I don't have any receptor. So the hormone can't have an effect on those cells unless there is a receptor. And this is the image of your book highlighting the different endocrine glands. So let's look at those. Where are the following glands? I want you to spend some time thinking about that. We'll review this in our Zoom room, but given a diagram, can you find these different endocrine glands? We'll play the matching game in Zoom. I'll let you think about it. And remember, you could just look in your book, or you could really spend some time trying to figure out yourself so you know what you know and what you still need to learn, because that's what growth mindset people do. And then once you've got the locations of all of those, what do they do? Let me walk you through these. So metabolism. I'll identify the organ for you and you'll figure out where it's at. You ready to play? Okay, so the main gland for metabolism is your thyroid. You know where that one is? Time to figure that out. Its close neighbor is in charge of maintaining your blood calcium levels, not too high, not too low. So that will be your parathyroid. I remember that because it's like you have a pair of, or a couple of pairs of glands inside of your thyroid. So there's a hint of where that is. Your sleep-wake cycle, yeah, you've already worked with that one, right? You know that one. Your pineal gland, releasing the hormone melatonin. Growth. Yep. This is an extension of your brain. There's your hint there. So this one is your pituitary gland. Immune system development. That one is your thymus. Where's that? Found that one? Stress, both long-term and short-term. And we'll get into more detail on this one, but these are your adrenal glands. Still not sure where those are. They're named after the system they are very close to, known as the renal system, also known as the urinary system. Blood sugar levels, that is controlled by your pancreas, which is very close to your stomach. Sperm production, I don't know, what's a tough one? That would be the testes or a testis. And ovulation would be ovaries. Okay, so there's the basic functions. Yeah, many of these glands have multiple functions, but we got to start somewhere. All right, so let's go to the brain and talk about this hypothalamus pituitary relationship. So you will remember, I hope, that in your very center of your brain, you have this part called your diencephalon, and that includes your thalamus and the pineal gland, and then just below your thalamus is this triangular area called your hypothalamus. So if we were to look at, so your thalamus is kind of this oblong shaped thing. Here's your pineal gland here, the cerebellum, which is in charge of your coordinated movement, would be here. And then just below your thalamus, which is this oval shaped thing, is your hypothalamus. And then coming off of the hypothalamus is the pituitary gland, which has 2 lobes. So your hypothalamus has many roles. You remember it does things like helps to regulate your body temperature and many other involuntary autonomic nervous system components to it that's helping to regulate your body. And your hypothalamus is also where your nervous system and your endocrine system have this really intimate relationship and conversation. So it's kind of where your nervous system and your endocrine system link. And together, these really are the master switch of your endocrine system. Here's why. Your hypothalamus talks to both lobes here. This one is your anterior, and this is your posterior lobe. What do you notice about how those are different from one another? Yeah, nice job. That you have, here's the cell body of neurons, and those axons are going down into the posterior lobe. And actually, in your posterior lobe, the hormones are stored in the ends of these axons. So kind of like neurotransmitters, but because they're getting released into the blood, they act as hormones. Examples are things like oxytocin and ADH. We'll talk about ADH later, but it's an antidiuretic hormone. So it talks to your kidneys and helps you to regulate how much urine volume your body is making. Okay. And then your anterior, you'll notice the axons end here before we get into the lobe. So those are going to emit their hormones, which are then going to go through the blood into the pituitary gland. And then the pituitary gland itself is going to then release hormones. And it releases many hormones, like half a dozen or more. And each one of those hormones tends to then have a conversation with another gland. Like, hey, I've arrived. I've got this idea. How about you secrete this other hormone to then go talk to everybody else and change things? So they're considered the master switch of the endocrine system because they release hormones that then go and have conversations with other endocrine glands. So that the target cells for many of these are other endocrine glands. Yeah. And they tend to just control a lot of what's going on in your body and helping it to stay healthy. So there you have it. Hypothalamus, pituitary. So 3 types of stimuli for hormones to be released. So there are 3 ways that an endocrine gland gets the information like, hey, it's time to release this hormone. Let's look at that. Humoral stimulus means that there's something in the blood that is sending that message. The image that you're looking at right now, if you haven't figured it out already, is in the neck. So this is your thyroid here, which is the gland that that's near your trachea. And within that thyroid gland at the back or the posterior side of that thyroid are smaller glands within it. And that's the parathyroid. Those are these little golden orbs that are in the thyroid. And the parathyroid's job is it's monitoring the amount of calcium that is in the blood. And so these cells have proteins that are basically sensing, is the calcium just right? Is it too high? Is it too low? Where are we on our Goldilocks principle? And if it's too low, calcium levels are just not quite high enough, then that's a problem for your body. And so the response is the parathyroid gland is going to release a hormone called, you're going to love this, parathyroid hormone. I know, whoever named that, I like that. Let's just make it easy. So the parathyroid hormone gets released from the parathyroid gland based on the level of calcium levels in the blood. So some chemical concentration in the blood is causing a release of the hormone. And we call that a humoral stimulus. Not because it's funny, but because humor means bodily fluids. Another option is a neural stimulus, meaning that we have an axon that is leaving either the brain or the spinal cord. And ooh, check that out. So this is the lateral horn. Do you remember what subdivision of the nervous system leaves the lateral horn of your spinal cord? Yes, autonomic. And in this case, it is our sympathetic nervous system. And it is that axon's leaving the spinal cord, and it is innervating. That funky little triangular thing is the adrenal gland. And it is specifically innervating the center portion of your adrenal gland, or what's known as the medulla of your adrenal gland. And when it releases neurotransmitters from those axon terminals, that sends a signal to the medulla of the adrenal gland to release a hormone. And in this case, it is epinephrine, which is part of your fight or flight response. All right, so neural stimulus means that something is a neurotransmitter is causing it to be released. Right on. Third option, hormonal stimulus. So one hormone causes the release of another hormone, like a domino effect, but with hormones. Recognize this guy? Yeah, the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland does this a lot, where it is releasing hormones that then cause other glands to release hormones. So there's a hormone that tells your thyroid to release thyroxine, which is the one of the hormones that helps regulate your metabolism. There's another hormone that talks to, instead of the center, it's talking to the outside of the adrenal gland, known as the cortex. And that is what is going to release cortisol, which is your long-term stress hormone. And then this thing that kind of looks like an egg, but totally isn't, is a testicle. And there's a hormone that gets released from the pituitary gland that then tells the testicle to release testosterone. So that is hormonal stimulus. One hormone causes the release of another hormone. Pituitary gland does that a lot because it's the master switch of your endocrine system, along with your hypothalamus. And there's all the details from your book. But I thought we'd build it rather than overwhelm you with words. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few specific examples. So one, the adrenal glands. Where are they? Have you found them? Yes, you have. Here. Oh, wrong. That was a not helpful color. How about this one? Yeah, here and here, right on top of the kidneys, these little triangular guys. So they're in charge of, well, they're helping to regulate your short-term and your long-term stress response. We call your short-term stress response your fight or flight response, and your long-term stress, well, we just call that stress. The anatomy of your adrenal glands sit right on top of the superior end of your kidneys, and it has this center portion called the adrenal and the outer portion called the cortex. The cells look a little bit different, and they're producing different hormones. So we're going to break this image down in your textbook, and we're going to start with our short-term stress. And as we've already discussed, do you remember what part of your nervous system is telling you you have short-term stress? Yes, your sympathetic nervous system. So where does this thing get started? Well, somewhere something is happening. You're getting information from your external world, like, there's scary things happening. And your hypothalamus says, I know what to do. Your hypothalamus, which is where this whole thing gets started, sends an action potential down your sympathetic nerve fiber that has conversations with your adrenal medulla, the center part. And when those action potentials arrive in that adrenal medulla, then that causes the release of hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine, which then have all kinds of conversations with your body. So a few of your, so imagine this is circulating throughout your entire blood system. Which target cells have conversations with this epinephrine and norepinephrine? Well, your heart has some protein receptors for these hormones. And the result is it tells your heartbeat to beat faster. And your blood vessels also have receptors, right? So those are also target cells. And specifically, it's the smooth muscle in your blood vessels. And it causes, it causes some of your blood vessels to constrict more, like the ones that are part of your digestive tract. And it causes other blood vessels in your body to dilate, to open up, especially the ones of your skeletal muscles. Because if you are in your fight or flight mode, you're probably needing to use your skeletal muscles. You're probably going to need more blood going to those skeletal muscles. So those dilate. Thirdly, you have these tubes in your lungs. So the trachea comes down and branches into things called bronchioles. Those dilate, or they get bigger, so that increases airflow. So you also have target cells in the bronchioles in the lung. So one messenger, right, one type of hormone can have all these different effects because we have different target cells, we have different types of receptors that can then cause different effects in each one of these organs. Pretty cool. On the other side of the house, we have more prolonged stress or long-term stress. You'll notice this also starts in the hypothalamus. So all stress starts in your hypothalamus. But there's a different route to your adrenal gland for more prolonged stress, stress of a longer duration. In this case, a message is sent to your pituitary gland, the anterior lobe, and that anterior lobe is going to release a hormone we call ACTH. You want to know what it stands for? It's in your book. But the thing I want you to recognize is that ACTH is a hormone that gets released from your pituitary gland and then has to travel through your blood. How long does that take? Well, every minute, all of the blood in your body has fully gone through both circuits. So from your heart to your lungs, back to your heart, through your whole body, and then back to your heart. So for all 5 to 6 liters of your blood, it does that every minute. Pretty good. So it can take about a minute or less for this ACTH to arrive to the outer portion or the cortex of your adrenal gland. And once it does that, it releases 2 main types of hormones, your mineral corticoids and those glucocorticoids. Yeah. This might feel a little more familiar. Cortisol is a type of glucocorticoid. What do? Well, these hormones talk to several organs because several organs have protein receptors. Just try and make sure you got this theme down, right? It's only going to impact the cells that have the protein receptors. And that's what makes it a target cell. In your kidneys, the conversation that these hormones have with your kidneys is to reduce urine output. In other words, we're going to retain more of the water in our blood and urinate out less of it. And that means your blood volume stays higher and that increases blood pressure. Number 1. Yeah, it's true. Your kidneys have a lot to do with blood pressure. That's new to you. Cool, welcome to class. Liver. It's going to talk to your liver. Remember, your liver is on your right side of your body, right? That big triangular thing. It stores all kinds of stuff. And without getting too deep into the physiology of it, these hormones can tell your liver to release more glucose into the blood so that the rest of your body has more glucose in order to make ATP so it can deal with whatever stress is happening. All right. Our calcium connection, you ready? So we're going to move superiorly in the body up to the thyroid and parathyroid. As mentioned, it's these little golden orbs that are the parathyroid, and the number of parathyroid bodies inside of the thyroid varies from person to person, but on average, it's 4. And these have epithelial cells, that specialized epithelial cells that release the parathyroid hormone. Okay. And as you can see, it's towards the posterior side of the neck. So here's this trachea, and this red part is muscles that help you to move around your neck, and then you've got this parathyroid. Okay. So what I want you to work on, you have a different figure in the newest version of the textbook, which I don't like as much as the oldest version. So I'm providing you with the older version that you can work with either from this video or from the actual PowerPoint slide, or your new version also has the same information, it's just diagrammed differently. But here are the questions I want you to think about. What triggers the release of parathyroid hormone? What organs have cells with parathyroid hormone receptors or target cells? I'll give you a hint. There are 2 types of organs that have those. And then I want you to be able to describe the 3 ways that PTH increases blood calcium levels and what decreases the release of PTH into the bloodstream. All right, so those are the things I want you to be ready to talk about. I'll walk you through it a bit. Let's get started. We will start at the parathyroid. Notice we have a little key here. Little red dots mean calcium ions, and little purple triangles are our parathyroid hormone molecule. So hypocalcemia. Hypo means low. So if blood calcium levels are low, that is a humoral stimulation that's going to tell these parathyroid glands, hey, blood calcium is low, you need to do something about it. And they're like, oh yeah, that's our job. So we're going to release parathyroid hormone and into the blood. And so we're going to follow that parathyroid hormone and see who has target cells for that parathyroid hormone. What do you notice? Yep, bones and your kidneys. So here's number 1, here's number 2. In your bone, do you remember what kind of cells break down that matrix? Yeah, osteoclasts. So in this case, the PTH is going to interact with a protein receptor that causes osteoclasts to become activated. They're going to degrade or dissolve that extracellular matrix of your bones and cause that calcium to be released. It's going to go into the bloodstream and help increase your calcium levels. There's number 1. The other organ that has target cells for PTH is the kidney. And now the kidney can do 2 different things. It can increase calcium reabsorption in your kidney, and it also promotes the activation of vitamin D. Well, you know this story, which increases calcium absorption from the food. Now notice, are there receptors for PTH in the intestines? No, there are not. So there's this cascade event that the intestines are impacted, but they themselves do not have protein receptors for parathyroid hormone. I know, it's so wonderful, wonderfully complex. So let's talk a little bit more about what's happening with your kidneys. The active unit or the functioning unit of your kidneys is called a nephron, and that's that yellow tube that curlicue yellow tube you were seeing. And in that nephron, there are the target cells for our PTH. And the conversation goes like this. Hey, maybe stop putting so much calcium into the nephron and peeing it out as urine. Stop doing that. And maybe put the calcium back into the blood. That's what it means by reabsorption. That the calcium originally goes into this tube called the nephron, and if it stays in that tube, then it will become part of the urine. Or it could be reabsorbed back into the blood. So that's what it means by reabsorption. We're going to reabsorb that calcium back into the blood, and that's going to increase our calcium levels by taking that calcium out of this yellow tube and back into blood, and then we've increased the calcium. Number 2. Number 3. PTH does that. It also, vitamin D, this is where vitamin D likes to get some Z's. So this is where vitamin D is inactive. Here's a pillow, nice bed. So the vitamin D is sleeping. It's inactive, but it gets stored in your kidneys. And there are cells inside of your kidneys with PTH receptors that once the PTH binds to those receptors, it tells those cells to wake up. It's the alarm clock for, that does not look like an alarm clock. Anyway, wakes up our vitamin D, activates it, and once the vitamin D is activated, then it's like, oh, I'm awake, I'm good. What am I going to do? Well, you're going to jump in the bloodstream, and once you're in the bloodstream, then it gets taken to the small intestines. In the small intestines, that vitamin D is going to arrive through those capillary beds into the, do you remember this? So many weeks ago, what kind of epithelium? Simple. They're long and tall, so they are columnar. Epithelium. And inside of those cells, remember they look like this, and they have a nucleus, and the vitamin D tells the nucleus, hey, you should, we're low on calcium, the parathyroid hormone from the pituitary gland told me to tell you that our body's really low on calcium right now. So if you could build some of those special calcium doors, portal proteins that allows calcium to come into the small intestines so that it can go into the blood, that would be really great. I'm just the messenger. Okay, so Simple Columnar's like, yeah, sure, we'll build some of these calcium channels and we'll make sure that we're absorbing more calcium from the food we're eating so that it can be absorbed through that simple columnar epithelium into the blood and from the blood. Then voila, we've increased the blood calcium in 1, 2, 3 ways. Amazing. Question. Okay. So big idea. Same hormone interacts with different protein receptors, and different receptors cause different changes in target cells. Endocrine system. Endocrine system's also involved in this thing called a negative feedback loop. And that's not a value statement. It's not that it's bad. It's that it causes, well, let me read this to you. The response of the body places the body, nicely worded, Aaron. Okay, the response of the body places the body back in homeostasis. So somehow we've gotten out of homeostasis. For example, the blood calcium levels have gotten too low. The response increases the original stimulus. Okay, so originally you'll remember our blood calcium was low. So, well, we released this PTH hormone that told the bones, hey, increase blood calcium, told the kidneys, hey, reabsorb more calcium from the urine, and told the intestines, hey, absorb more calcium from the food we're eating. And that led to an increase in calcium, right? So if the original stimulus was low calcium, the feedback is, okay, well, we're going to increase that stimulus. It works the opposite way as well. If blood calcium gets too high, guess what happens? Yeah, the parathyroid's like, oh, okay, we're good. I'll stop releasing my parathyroid hormone. Okay. And then all of this business slows down and we are balancing this out. And it's constant. The half-life for this, you might have noticed that up in the corner, is 4 minutes, which means that once the parathyroid hormone is released from the gland, that half of that is degraded within 4 minutes. And then it kind of trickles off from there. So your body's constantly monitoring the calcium levels inside of the blood, because as you're learning, calcium has a lot of roles and it's really important. So it's constantly, it's like a teeter-totter, and your body's trying to keep it here instead of, ouch, one end or the other. And that's a feedback loop. It's too high, we're going to bring it back down. It's too low, we're going to bring it back up. Let's look at another example. Blood sugar levels. So glucose is providing energy to your cells to make ATP. And that's really important because without ATP, your cells die. Trying to prevent that. So your body has multiple ways of monitoring blood glucose levels and making sure that those stay high enough. The primary ways is your pancreas. Voila. Which looks like a really funny corn on the cob, but it's it's just superior, or excuse me, your stomach is superior to your pancreas on the left side of your body, and it is involved in this negative feedback loop of your blood glucose. Let's talk about how. Well, if your the stimulus is the blood glucose is too high, what does your pancreas do? Releases insulin. Excuse me. I'll let you work through that while I. Yeah, so your tissues have receptors for insulin. body tissues, like especially your muscle cells, have receptors for insulin. So they're able to uptake that glucose so they can make ATP and continue to contract and do what they do. So does your liver. And when you have abundance of glucose in your blood cells, the liver is going to store that glucose as glycogen. So glycogen is just a molecule of a bunch of glucose molecules all stuck together. So imagine like glucose is a single Lego and you're just like making this monster Lego molecule that you can break apart later when you need it. Glucose storage. So that allows glucose to be pulled out of the bloodstream and our glucose levels fall back to normal, right? Original stimulus up, response down. Teeter-totter, negative feedback loop. What's going on the other side of the house? Well, if it gets too low, then we still have the pancreas to thank, but now it's going to release a different hormone. It's going to release glucagon because the glucose is gone. My glucagon's gone. So the primary protein that has a protein receptors, target cells, is your liver. And now it's going to take the glycogen it just took so much work to make, and it's going to break it apart into those individual glucose molecules. So we're going to take apart your Lego sculpture. I know you worked so hard on it. It was beautiful. I loved it. Spires and it's inspiring. But you're going to break it apart. And now that glucose is released back into the bloodstream. And now our glucose is back up, right? Negative feedback. Question I have for you is, what do you know about diabetes? And what questions do you have about diabetes? And we can chat about diabetes in our Zoom room. Because that is going to be, if you are a medical practitioner, this is an endocrine disease you are probably most likely going to encounter. Voila, I'll see you in our class.